Joining us. I'm proud to be here today in Albany County with my good friend, County Executive Dan McCoy, who will be coming up to say a few words in just a few moments. We're here for New York State Association of Counties Board of Directors meeting, and of course our Executive Director Steve Aquario, who's here, will also be speaking. I want to thank him for his great work and his leadership of this critical organization in our state, and of course the Dutchess County Executive Mark Molinaro, who will also be saying a few words in just a moment. And we're here together, and one of the important subjects that we'll be talking about today at this meeting is the proposed federal legislation regarding tax reform and its potential impact on us here in New York State, in our counties, and in our communities. We have, I can tell you, in Suffolk County and across Long Island, come out very strongly in urging not only our congressional representatives, but really urging the president, who is a fellow New Yorker, to step forward and protect our region and our state, quite frankly, from what could be some devastating impacts from this legislation. You know, our business organizations on Long Island, the Long Island Association, Association for a Better Long Island, have put out reports indicating that in Long Island alone, we could be looking at a massive tax increase that amounts into the billions of dollars. We've seen reports come out from independent experts that say home sales and home values could plummet as a result of this legislation. We're concerned about consumer spending going down, impacts on small businesses. So the bottom line is we are focused on making sure that we preserve that deduction on state and local property taxes that is really important to a state like ours, particularly to our region on Long Island. And we're urging the president, you know, this is not, I think you can see here, this is not a partisan issue. This is our entire congressional delegation on Long Island is opposed to this bill. This is an issue of what is right for our communities, for our counties, and for our state, and what makes sense moving forward here. And that's why we're really urging the president to use his power and authority to make sure that whatever happens here at the end of the day, that this state, his home state, and our region, Long Island, that our interests are protected, that this deduction of state and local property taxes, which again for Long Island could be catastrophic in terms of its impacts, that this does not become law. You know, this, and you know, we're going to be moving forward. I'll be putting forward a resolution today that we will be considering at the Board of Directors meeting today, urging our congressional delegation to protect that state and local property tax deduction. But this is something that has been in our tax code, in the federal tax code, from the very beginning. The notion that we would pay these state taxes and these local property taxes, and again then be taxed on top of that by the federal government, amounts to double taxation, something we're very concerned about. So for all of these reasons, we've come together, county executives and the Association of Counties, to say very clearly that this current legislation should not, and cannot become law because of the devastating impacts that it can have on our communities, our counties, and our state. And with that, I want to ask my good friend and colleague, the Dutchess County Executive Molinaro, to come forward and say a few words. Mark.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks very much, County Executive. Public policy shouldn't punish people. And anything that is referred to as tax relief should indeed be tax relief. The middle-class families of the state of New York didn't raise their property taxes. The middle-class families of the state of New York didn't ask for a higher burden as New York State residents to shoulder as homeowners and taxpayers. Yet a public policy established now in Congress could very well punish them for living in a high property tax state. That is not good public policy, and it ultimately will lead to the punishment and hurting middle-class families across the state of New York. You know, our concern is as specific as that and more broad. This particular, the loss of the state and local tax deduction could have a compounding effect, as was noted, on the property values, assessed valuations in obviously parallel to that, and our ability as local government officials to provide services in an already difficult environment. This is bipartisan. We've had members of Congress, as you know, from both parties vote yes and vote no, and I trust that they make that decision based on what they believe is best for their constituents. But I know for the people of Dutchess County, and I can say quite candidly, I think for most middle-class families, certainly throughout the Mid-Hudson Valley South, this proposal and this bill is not going to produce real tax relief, and in many cases will result in families paying more in taxes. And I reiterate again that public policy shouldn't punish people. Let me also acknowledge what is terribly obvious, and that is that New York State leaders are not without some responsibility as well. We live in a state that forces more of its state spending down onto local property taxpayers than most states in America. And despite having been in this very building when we voted for the property tax cap, and I say as a county executive, I'm happy I did, it was supposed to be married with significant reductions in the cost shifted to local property taxpayers, mandate relief. And we obviously all agree that Washington should not take this next step that will punish New York taxpayers. At the same time, we have consistently said that New York needs to take a leadership role in reducing the cost on property taxpayers as well. There's no reason why this state needs to do something that 49 other states don't do, and really take responsibility for the high burden it places on local property taxpayers. And I hope that what is now a clear and obvious concern in this federal tax bill will result in leaders stepping forward to find real solutions to drive down the burden on taxpayers, to stop this particular bill from moving forward, and at the same time compel our leaders in Albany to pay attention to the fact that taxpayers across the state of New York are shouldering far too much in property taxes. Again, they didn't ask for those taxes. Citizens, taxpayers did not ask for those taxes to be as high as they are today, and we ought not have public policy that punishes them. And I think together you're going to hear a bipartisan chorus that continues to impress upon our state and federal leaders. Thanks very much.
County Executive McCoy.
Thank you. Well, you know, to my counterparts, and they said it well, but if you look behind me, it's about working together. It doesn't matter about party affiliation on this topic, because we have an obligation to our constituents. We have an obligation to lead them, and I'm hoping that our New York State delegates across the state take that to heart when they're down in D.C. fighting for our rights on bills like this. And I had a leaders meeting yesterday, and I'm talking to all the elected officials in Albany County, and I said, well, really when people are going to realize how this affects them is when they do their tax return and they see how their taxes change from last year to this year. And I said, and that's when you're going to start getting the phone calls, and people are going to be upset saying, wait a minute, I lost out on $2,000, because you know what, people are busy, they're living their lives, and we see what's going on down in D.C., dysfunction at best. And you know what, it's not right to the people of this great country of ours to work together. I was just down there last week for an opiate task force, but we're down there lobbying for this tax bill and other things, and unfortunately none of that happened, and we get this tax bill. But I also, when I'm down in our great nation and looking at our capital, I'm walking around, you can't go 30 feet without walking into a homeless person. We don't even talk about that. I mean, there's so many issues with the opiate crisis, the homeless people in this nation, and then now this, and what it does to our middle class. This is an assault on our middle class here in Albany County, and unfortunately, I've tried to get it out to our constituents. Again, they're not going to realize it until they do the tax return. And we have to work together. We can finger point all day long, but if we don't come together as a partnership and show the good leaders of New York State that we can work together and find a solution to this, it's not going to change. It's only going to get worse. And I want to tell people that you better brace yourself between what's going on the federal side and the state side of the house. It's going to affect our counties. And I can't thank another great partner, Steve Aquario from NYSAC, really being out on the forefront of really working through our organization to find different ways that we can work together. And to see the three of us standing here too, with my two other county executives, says a lot. And this is something that everyone has to pay attention to, and you have to speak up, because if you don't, more stuff like this is going to continue. Thank you.
Steve?
I'd like to thank the county executives that made time to come here today, particularly County Executive Balone, for really appealing to the President of the United States. And that's what we're here today to do. We are appealing to President Trump. He is a New Yorker. And as County Executive Balone appealed to him earlier, we're here to underscore the importance of that. The Congress knows it. The United States Senators from New York knows it. The New York congressional delegation has heard about this from many voices, and today we're adding another voice, the voice of county elected leaders who serve New Yorkers across the state and provide essential public services all across the state. The President vacations in Long Island. The President is very familiar with Long Island. The President is familiar with the home values on Long Island. The President is familiar with the economy of Long Island and how that system works. And today we're appealing on a particular issue called SALT, a state and local tax deduction. As has been mentioned, it's been on our books for hundreds of years, since the very beginning. But New York counties, many of them are urban, many of them are suburban, many of them are rural, some are affluent, some are struggling in their economies. The association believes that this tax reform disrupts a centuries-old tradition of exempting state and local taxation for federal tax purposes. And despite any positives that might be part of this federal tax reform, and there are, let's not mistake it, there are positives in the tax reform. It was a long time coming to reform the federal tax code, that despite that, the principle of the elimination of the state and local tax deduction is reason enough to reject this reform. And we're calling on the President to use his leadership and use his influence to protect this state. We're also concerned about a greater population loss. As the county executives have mentioned, the effect on home values. Our population used to have over 40 members in Congress in the 1970s. Today we have 27. New York can no longer afford to lose more population from this state due to any reasons, not being able to deduct income taxes, property taxes, mortgages for second homes. These are issues of great concern to us. And so I appreciate County Executive Balone advancing a resolution before the NYSAC board. Appreciate County Executive Dan McCoy consistently standing up on this issue. Appreciate County Executive Molinaro representing the Hudson Valley and downstate New York and all those issues of great concern. We are united, and this must be rejected. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Hey, and I want to thank my colleagues and Steve again. And I would point out that, the President is from New York. Geographically speaking, he is from Long Island. He was born in Queens. He understands this region. And he also understands, I think, and we want to make sure he understands the disproportionate impact that this will have on his home region, his home state. But that, being a middle-class family in Madison, Wisconsin, or Louisville, Kentucky, is very different than being a middle-class family in New York. And that needs to be understood. It needs to be taken into account when moving forward with tax reform. And clearly, it has not been. And something else we've heard much more about lately, or already hearing talk about what needs to happen after this. A number of independent experts have come forward to say that this bill may add significantly to our deficit and to our national debt, upwards of $1 trillion or more. And if that is then, following this, used as a pretense to cut or to gut Medicare and Social Security, programs that are critically important to middle class and working class families, then we have an even more significant problem here. And we're already starting to hear talk about that. So this is a critically important issue for us in New York. It's why we're coming together to speak loudly as county executives in one voice to say that